I've got about 5 after. Shall we get started? All right. Can everybody hear me well? Before I talk too much, I want to make sure I'm audible. Thank you everybody for taking time out today to join us for the first ever online session of the Missouri Land Trust Coalition meeting. I want to thank you for bearing with us through all of this confusion and uncertainty. So hopefully this is a format that'll still be useful and a good opportunity for us all to interact and learn a few things and get updated on what all's going on in our state land trust community. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. My name is Mike Powell. I'm the Executive Director at Greenbelt Land Trust of Mid-Missouri, and I'm also co-chair of our Land Trust Coalition Steering Committee. I want to take a moment right here at the beginning to thank the rest of the steering committee, Carol Davit from Prairie Foundation, Larry Levin from Ozark Land Trust, Ginny Moore from the Conservation Fund, David Stokes from the Great Rivers Habitat Alliance, and particularly Cindy Pessoni from the Nature Conservancy, who has been our Zoom guru and tech facilitator and all-around logistics expert as we put all this together. It is not an exaggeration to say this would not be happening without her help. So special thanks to Cindy and a special thanks to Jill, the chair of this year's steering committee. Thank you for providing your leadership and helping us get this thing off the ground despite a lot of craziness. Before I go too much further, I want to chat briefly about a couple of things. First, I'd like to acknowledge the loss of a member of our land trust community, Karen Brinkman of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's NRCS. I believe she was NRCS. Lost her battle with cancer here recently. So I just wanted to take a moment and acknowledge that loss. She did an enormous amount particularly for farm conservation in the state of Missouri. So it's a loss to our community to no longer have her with us. And I also want to acknowledge that I already have a couple times that we are operating in a strange new world than last year. We had planned to have this meeting in person in Springfield. In an ideal world, we would all be breaking bread and drinking coffee together right now, but obviously we're not doing that. And in addition to the global health emergency, there are so many other things going on right now that are adding to everybody's stress and difficulty. So I just want to reiterate, thank you all for taking some time out to be with us today. I know this has been hard on everybody. I hope you're all taking care of yourselves. And related to that, I wanted to say, this is our conversations are governed somewhat by format, and when we insert a computer screen between ourselves and others, sometimes it's easy to depersonalize a little bit, and we're all under enough stress that there's an opportunity for us to have some difficult communications today. I just wanted to say this is a new experience. We're existing in a stressful time. Let's take special care to be gentle with each other and extend some grace to each other as we navigate this today. With that, I want to cover a few things about the format of today's meeting. The first thing is we are recording today's meeting, so if you miss something or have to duck out or your internet crashes or anything like that, don't fret. You'll be able to go back and watch the recording later. So that's good. And then the plan is pretty much to go solid from now until 1 p.m. So if you are used to eating lunch in that time frame and you need to have a snack on hand or duck out to grab a snack, keep an eye on those blood sugar levels. We don't want anybody getting hangry or passing out while we're doing this. And please feel free to make liberal use of audio and video mute buttons. we're going to have Cindy's going to run through some details on that. We do have a couple breaks built in. Those are intended to be used for Q&A. If questions are available, that might also be a good time to, if you need to duck out and use the facilities or refill your water bottle, that might be a good opportunity for it. The last thing I want to note before we get too far into it is that the steering committee's recommendation is that we do 3 additional virtual meetings like this. And theoretically, we'd like to do them on the 10th of each of the next 3 months. That's not set in stone. That was the idea that kind of came out as we talked about it in our planning meetings. There will be a survey we're going to send out after this meeting that'll give you the opportunity to offer some feedback on that. The format won't be exactly the same. We'll have some different programming and things, but there's some stuff later on that'll refer to that. So I wanted to go ahead and throw that out there so there wasn't confusion. And with that, I'm going to drop out of my screen share if I can figure out how to do that. There we go. So I can hand it off to Cindy so she can pull up the agenda. So everybody should have received a copy of the agenda in your email. If you didn't, shoot me a private message in the chat and I will be glad to forward it to you real quick. That should give you an idea of how the day is going to unfold. So you can see we'll have a Q&A break right before 11 and another Q&A break around 12:20. So, you know, take care of yourself. Don't feel like you have to be here for every minute of the next 3 hours. We hope it's useful for your time, but you know, it's also important to take care of yourself. So please do that. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Cindy and let her tell us how to navigate Zoom.
Great. Thanks, everybody, and welcome. It's good to see so many faces along the sidebar. I'm sad stand-in for being there in person, but it is nice to see smiling faces there. I think most of us are probably crash course Zoom experts at this point in the spring and summer. But I did want to cover a few things in case this isn't second nature for you. What we're looking at here is a Zoom interface that you'll see if you're on computer, and your control panel buttons are going to be along the bottom part of your screen. In particular, you know, pay attention to the mute and video start stop. As Mike mentioned, feel free to turn your video off if you need to step away. Keep in mind that as we're going in and out of presentations and different speaker views on your screen, if your video is on, even if you're not seeing yourself, others likely are seeing you. So if you do need to step away or anything like that, and you want to just toggle your video on and off, that's those first 2 control buttons. There's a participant panel, and I'll show you kind of a quick zoom in on that in a moment. The chat feature is on the bottom, and we'll highlight that in a moment as well as far as using that for our Q&A sessions. There's some quick reactions if you want to give a thumbs up as people are talking. If we kind of, you know, nod of a head works, if you want to use one of those reactions as well. And then the other area I want to highlight is, so on computer users, you'll see this on the top of the screen, is a toggle between your speaker view and gallery view. And that'll control whether or not you see only the active speaker on your screen, or if you can see a little snapshot of everybody in kind of a checkerboard pattern. For iPad or tablet users, your controls interface is a little bit different. Most of your controls are across the top, your mute and video on and off there. Those quick reactions and your chat features are in the More section. So if you're looking for the chat to put a Q&A question in, you'll have to click on those 3 little dots, and that'll pop open the chat option for you. One other difference on tablet and iPad, the view selection between gallery and speaker view is on the top left part of your screen when you touch to get your controls up. So just a quick note there. The participants panel will show you everybody who's on if they're muted or speaking. It has a couple of other features. We really won't be using the raise hand feature for purposes of this meeting, since our chat's going to be facilitated through, or questions and answers are going to be facilitated through the chat, and we'll focus on that in just a moment. And then this is just a quick example of the speaker and gallery view, whether you're seeing a focus in on just the person who's actively speaking, or if you have a snapshot of everybody on your screen. A few general tips having to do with bandwidth. If you're having lag issues or anything like that, try closing all of your other internet-based applications. Maybe turn off your video if the audio is hanging for you. And then, as Mike mentioned, if you need to step away for a break, you can turn your audio and video off before doing that. Mike also mentioned at the top of the call, we are recording this session. We're also going to be using a few features within Zoom. The first of those is Breakout Rooms, and MaryKay will be leading us in a breakout discussion shortly. What you'll see on your screen is this, this first option will pop up notifying you that you're being assigned to a breakout room, and you'll click join, and then you'll move into a separate room. About a minute before those breakout sessions are closing, you'll get another notice that you can either kind of postpone or jump out and then rejoin the main group. We'll also use poll features, and we'll, as the presenters are talking through their poll questions, we'll get those up on the screen for you so you can share your poll responses with the group. And then the chat feature, I'm gonna let Carol Davit jump on and explain how she is gonna be monitoring and managing chats for the Q&A. So, Carol.
Chat. And for example, you might have clarifying questions about what a presenter just said, and I will do my best to answer those kinds of questions, and you may have other more in-depth questions, and I will field those questions out verbally to the speakers during the Q&A. And in some cases, there may be references that the presenters have provided, and I will share those links in the chat, and I believe we can send those to you after the meeting as well. So please feel free to type in questions in the chat.
If we are wrapped up with Zoom protocol, we're going to do a quick little breakout session here. I'm going to hand it off to Ginny from the Conservation Fund to run us through how that's going to work. So, Ginny.
Well, good morning, everyone, and we're certainly glad you were able to join us today. I hope you enjoy what we do, as well as get learn a little bit, maybe something new. For the breakout sessions, we're doing this because we realize that the past few months have been very stressful for our organizations, for our ability to move projects forward, and really, most importantly, stressful to each of us on a personal level. And so in planning this Zoom meeting, the planning team thought that one of the things that we will all miss the most about not getting to meet in person is that opportunity for one-on-one or small group conversation, or just connecting with people, friends and colleagues that we don't see very often. So we know that a group discussion segment on Zoom doesn't exactly fill that gap, but we were hoping that breaking out into small groups might at least give us a chance to share in this smaller group setting a little bit about what we've each been dealing with recently. We're suggesting that you focus on the following question as a starting point for discussion. And that question is, what have you learned about yourself over the course of the last few months? So Cindy's going to set up the break room chat for us, and I'll turn it back to Cindy to get that accomplished.
Thanks, Ginny. I did want to ask if you are on a phone and also on a screen separately, I've got a few phone numbers, and I don't want to separate your phone audio from your video participation. So if you're in that situation, before I break people into groups, if you could either wave on screen or put your information in a chat and just let us know your name and what phone number, the last four digits of your phone number that you're dialing in from, then I can pair up your audio with the rest of your video experience. So I don't see if anybody is, I assume we do have some folks who are on phone only, and that will be fine to still be assigned there. Thanks, Barbara, I got yours. So I'm going to take a sec to look at our participants then and pair up those folks. All right, so I've got just 9265. All right, give me one moment on that. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody's line, and then we'll assign you all into your breakout rooms. If you do have any questions, we'll see that the folks who haven't left the room are remaining, and we can check in with you then.
All right. All right. I think everybody should be back in the main room now. So I will say I hope that was useful. It was nice to just have a little human interaction. It's reassuring to see all of your faces, but it's even better to have a little conversation. So, and to meet some new folks. So I hope that was useful and felt good for everybody else too. With that, I will move us along to the next part of our agenda here, which is the first of our presentations for today. I'm going to hand it off here in just a minute, but I want to introduce first MaryKay O'Donnell, who many of you have probably interacted with. She's the MaryKay. Are you still has your job title changed? Are you still the Midwest Senior Program Manager at LTA?
Yes, whatever that might mean.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of reorganization and stuff going on. So MaryKay is wonderful and has been great working with so many organizations. Bonnie, I just saw in chat, we'll be glad to share a list of all that contact information and attendees. That'll go out with via email after the meeting is concluded. So MaryKay, though, does lots of great work. She has a long history with the land trust movement, but she's helped primarily lately with what she's going to talk about today, a topic that's near and dear to most of our hearts, which is land trust accreditation. So with that, I will hand it off to MaryKay.
Great. Thanks so much for that introduction, Mike. I appreciate it. And hopefully, give me a thumbs up, Cindy, if you're seeing my screen. All right, great. Well, thank you so much for inviting the Land Trust Alliance to your conference today. And like all of you, I wish that we were in person, but I understand that it's much better that we are not. Sorry, my slides aren't moving forward. There we go. Great. So just to let you know, I am a Midwesterner. I grew up in Chicago, went to school in Central Illinois, crisscrossed the country, and 21 years ago moved to Michigan. I've been working for the Land Trust Alliance for 13 years now, and boy, time goes by really fast. My coworker in the Midwest region is Laura Eklov. You may have heard from Laura. She organizes all of our trainings, keeps things running, and together we provide services for 8 Midwestern states. I do want to go briefly through who the Land Trust Alliance is, because I think we need to understand that in order to understand the accreditation program, so I won't spend much time. But just to let all of you know, the Land Trust Alliance is a national nonprofit conservation organization. We help land trusts work faster, better, and stronger. We're the voice of the land trust community around the country. I do want to let you know our annual conference has also gone virtual. You can go to our website, landtrustalliance.org, and you can sign up for that. Everyone is invited to attend our rally, which is going to be in October. Just as Mike had introduced kind of the crazy times that we are having right now, I just wanted to express how thankful I am to be part of the land trust community. You know, across the country, land trusts are giving people opportunities to connect with nature, and more importantly right now, to connect with each other. As we're saving land, we're building community, and I think that's more important now than ever. And I just have a lot of gratitude for being a part of this movement. So just to introduce you to the Land Trust Alliance, we were founded in 1982 by land trusts across the country. We do have 1,000 member land trusts. There are about 15 land trusts in Missouri. And then we also have 1 land trust in Kansas and 1 in Illinois that also do work in Missouri, as well as a lot of different national conservation groups that are working in Missouri. So tons of conservation work that is happening through private organizations like land trusts. So how does the Land Trust Alliance help land trusts? I'll just go through some of our programs. We have our field programs, which means that we're working one-on-one with land trusts. This includes things like our Missouri Circuit Rider program, which is funded by the Missouri Department of Conservation. We also have education and training. We have a communications department. We'll be rolling out a relevancy campaign in 2021. We work on community conservation. We have a land and climate program working on land-based solutions to climate change. We have a federal policy advocacy program, a conservation defense program, which does include terra firma, which is our conservation defense insurance program. We do research, things like our census that we do every 5 years, our salary survey. And then we also promulgate land trust standards and practices. And we have established the Land Trust Accreditation Commission. So my charge today is to tell you about the benefits of land trust accreditation. So the Land Trust Accreditation Commission is an independent program of the Land Trust Alliance. It's made up of 19 volunteer commissioners, including Clint Miller, who's on with us today, and 7 staff members. We have a new executive director, Melissa Calvistran, that has been with the commission for many years. The Land Trust Accreditation Commission was set up in 2006, and our first accredited land trusts were accredited in 2008. This is a voluntary program. The goals of the Land Trust Accreditation Program are to build and recognize strong land trusts, to foster public confidence in land conservation, we can talk a little bit about that, and also to help ensure the long-term protection of land. To understand how we came to the accreditation program, I think it's important to understand a little bit of history. Accreditation has been being talked about for a very long time, all the way back to 1989. And then we had a catalyzing event. In 2004, there was a congressional investigation into the land trust movement. We were very vulnerable as a land trust community, and the Land Trust Alliance testified before the Joint Committee on Taxation on land trusts across the country. Congress was talking about instituting regulations for the land trust industry, and we said, no, we got this. Don't worry, we've got standards and practices. We're going to establish an accreditation program. We can handle this internally. We can handle it on our own. And thankfully, that worked. And I think that history is really important to keep in mind as we're talking about the benefits of accreditation. You know, we have standing and we have confidence in the land trust community, in large part because of the accreditation program. So how does the Land Trust Alliance and the Land Trust Accreditation Commission, how do they work together? So think about it like this. The Land Trust Alliance, we develop land trust standards and practices with the land trust community. There are 188 different practice elements, which is indicative of how complicated it is to run a land trust. The Land Trust Accreditation Commission focuses on a subset of those standards and practices called indicator practices. These are things that are indications of a land trust's full implementation of standards and practices, but we're only looking at 55 of those 188 practice elements. So the standards and practices are the ethical and technical guidelines for the responsible operation of a land trust. The important thing here is this is the collective wisdom of 1,000 different organizations across the country. None of us have to figure this out on our own. We can work together to sort of figure out how do we run our organizations. We last updated standards and practices in 2017, which was a very intensive 2-year-long process involving thousands of comments from land trusts all across the country. Once we updated standards and practices, the Land Trust Accreditation Commission, in response to requests from the land trust community, took the indicator elements and broke them into 4 different buckets: governance, finance, transactions, and stewardship. This is a way for people to sort of batch together all of the different standards. So we still have standards and practices 1 through 12, but there is a way of separating those out into governance, finance, transactions, and stewardship, so that you can, if your land trust wants to, just focus on, for example, finance. Your finance committee might take Land Trust Alliance has developed organizational assessments for all of standards and practices and for each of these 4 buckets. So your finance committee, for example, might take a look at the organizational assessment for finance and evaluate how are we doing in meeting standards and practices? Where do we need to improve? And then maybe the next year you focus on transactions. But a lot of land trusts do take standards and practices all the way 1 through 12 and follow them in order. So Land Trust Alliance, Land Trust Accreditation Commission, we do have separate roles. As I said, we are independent. We also have a confidentiality agreement. I, as a staff member of the Land Trust Alliance, cannot talk to the commission about any individual land trust. We can talk in generalities, we can talk about trends, we can talk about issues that we're going to see, which is going to be the next session, the next panel discussion, but we can't talk about any individual. Again, standards and practices lives with the Land Trust Alliance, we're the helpers. We help land trusts understand standards and practices and give tools to help them fully implement. We coach, we train, we educate. The Land Trust Accreditation Commission verifies that implementation of land trust standards and practices, and they develop the system for applying for accreditation. And they also have trainings on the requirements for that subset of indicator practices. So what is land trust accreditation? Essentially, it's a verification process. You can be following standards and practices. The accreditation just looks at and verifies that you are, in fact, following those standards and practices. We have 442 accredited land trusts across the country. Those land trusts, of the land that is held by land trusts across the country, the 442 accredited land trusts hold 79% of that land. There are many benefits of accreditation. One thing I want to say is we're going to talk about the benefits to an organization by itself, but also the benefits to the land trust community as a whole. It's very important, I think, to consider that an accredited land trust has been verified by an independent third party, the Land Trust Accreditation Commission, that they're following standards and practices. That in no way, shape, or form means that a land trust that is not accredited is not strong and sustainable and following standards and practices and doing great work. Accredited land trust, it's been verified. That doesn't mean a non-accredited land trust isn't doing great work. We have no expectation, and never did at the Land Trust Alliance or the Land Trust Accreditation Commission, that every land trust in the country is going to want to or need to be accredited. So I just want to make sure and say that, because we have really strong land trusts all over the country. So what are the benefits of accreditation? We look as a community at accredited land trusts. We know that accredited land trusts have sound financial practices. They have strong transactions. They have excellent land and easement stewardship practices, and they have effective governance. And we have been able to show that through the accreditation program. But to be clear, when I talk to land trusts across the Midwest and across the country, the number one thing they tell me the benefit of accreditation has been is that it made their organizations better. It made their organizations stronger. And even without the accreditation seal, that's the number one thing that land trusts tell us. It made us better. We have done a number of evaluations over the year of the accreditation program. We look at census data. We have interim, short-term, mid-term, and long-term evaluations of land trust practices of organizations that are accredited. And we also did an impact evaluation at the 10-year mark for accreditation. Just want to take you through a couple of things that we learned. This impact evaluation, like any nonprofit, it's all about what effect are we having? What good effect are we having in the world? What change are we making? So how have we impacted conservation? So we look not just at accredited land trusts, but as partners and community members as well. So what we found were a couple of things. 79% of government and foundation stakeholders told us that accreditation is factoring into their organization's decision making. Again, not that non-accredited land trusts aren't worthy of grants or partnerships or programs, but that they're using it almost as a shortcut to say, okay, we know that this group has been verified that they're following the standards. So we're starting to see that this is 10 years in, this is happening where partners are really starting to pay attention to that. The other thing is, and I will pass these slides along, so you'll have access to all these numbers. 85% of public agencies and foundations said accreditation increases their confidence in land trust. And this is across the land trust community as a whole, not just one land trust that happens to be accredited, but but the community as a whole, they have more confidence in. Another thing that we found from the impact evaluation is that 87% of accredited land trusts said accreditation motivated them to make organizational improvements. We also saw, when we compared the accredited land trusts before they were accredited to after they were accredited, we see that there was an increase in acres protected in a 10-year period between 2005 to 2015. Acres protected increased 100%, operating budgets a little over 100%, and greatly increased the number of volunteers that were involved in accredited land trusts. 85% of accredited land trusts told us that the accreditation program improved, again, the land trust community's ability to meet the promise of perpetuity. So not just that individual land trust, but across the community as a whole. Greatly increased defense and stewardship funds over that 10-year before and after period. In addition, what the 2015 census showed us was that accredited land trusts were 5 times more likely to monitor all of their easements every year and have a baseline documentation report for their conservation easements than their non-accredited colleagues. So we can very clearly show that the practices improve as land trusts go through the accreditation program. Again, every land trust tells us accreditation strengthened their organization. We also did some evaluation of not only the individual accredited land trusts, sort of over time, but also comparing accredited land trusts to non-accredited land trusts. And what we see is that accredited land trusts have more supporters and they raise more money than their non-accredited colleagues. They have 3 times as many volunteers. They have 8 times as much money set aside for stewardship and defense. And 5 times as much land is protected by accredited land trusts than non-accredited counterparts. Now, to be clear, can we draw a very bright straight line between being accredited and protecting more land and having more money and having more supporters? No. Can we know that accreditation is a contributing factor to that success? Absolutely. Another important thing was that 73% of land trusts told us that going through the accreditation process led to a more engaged board. This doesn't surprise me at all, because as you're going through accreditation, this is an all hands on deck organizational effort, and you're focusing on standards and practices, learning more about those, changing some of your policies and practices. 100% of respondents reported that the land trust, that accreditation helps the land trust community maintain the trust of Congress, the IRS, and the public. Again, critical to our ability to do our work is to have that trust. One of your Midwest colleagues from Michigan told us that accreditation is about assuring our work can live up to the lofty goal of conservation in perpetuity, and that's really what this is all about. The other thing that I have noticed is that, because I've been in the land trust world for 30 years now, and I have noticed a distinct change in the last decade, and I believe that it is due to accreditation, that even land trusts that are not interested in applying for accreditation are better because of it. There is an increased focus on standards and practices. There is an increased professionalization of the land trust community overall because of a focus on accreditation. We are maturing as an industry, and I think that is in large part due to accreditation. Sylvia Bates runs our Standards and Practices program, and one thing I wanted to point out is that she said we cannot continue to save land unless we have the public's confidence. And that is so true. And making sure that we can show people that we are operating our organizations appropriately, that we are strategically protecting land, that we are ensuring that the promises we make today to be here forever, that we can live up to that because we're raising the funds and dedicating funds to make sure we're going to be here for the long term. That helps make sure that we maintain that confidence. There are a couple of other tangible benefits to accreditation. If you are an accredited land trust and you enroll in our terra firma defense insurance program, you do get an $11 per parcel discount. Another thing that we're seeing is some of the federal agencies are looking at, can accredited land trusts have a streamlined process when working within these federal conservation funding programs? The latest Farm Bill actually allowed for accredited land trusts to apply to be certified entities so that they could be streamlined through the process. Unfortunately, that didn't make it into the interim rules, but I wanted to mention it here because I think this is indicative of the conversation that is happening around accredited land trusts. Another benefit is if you're an accredited land trust and you are enrolled in Conservancy, the Chubb insurance program, you do get a discount on directors and officers insurance. So these are real money benefits. There's intangible benefits as well. So I don't know, it made national news. We had a really unfortunate situation here in Michigan where we had really heavy rains and 2 different dams breached and flooded several towns, including the city of Midland. Little Forks Conservancy happens to have their offices in downtown Midland, spitting distance from the Tittabawassee River that flooded. The picture on the upper right is their office. They are expecting a complete or nearly complete loss of everything in their offices. At this point in time, they can't even get into their offices to actually check it's not safe yet. I know that they're not the only ones that have been through a flood. I know that there are people on the phone today that have been through a flood. There is nothing easy about this. It is a really devastating situation. But one thing I want to mention is I worked with Little Forks Conservancy when I first started at the Land Trust Alliance, going through their first accreditation application way back when, 12 years ago. They did not have duplicate records stored in a separate location. And the fact that they know that their most essential records can be recreated gives some solace, knowing that they have protected themselves in this way. Again, nothing easy about this. It's going to be a very long recovery period, but the fact that they are accredited gives comfort through that. So we do have one accredited land trust in Missouri, the Ozark Land Trust, applied for accreditation in the spring of 2018. They were accredited in February of 2019. And this is a picture of them celebrating as they walked across the stage at Rally last October. And I just want to give Larry Levin an opportunity to talk to us about what accreditation has meant for Ozark Land Trust.
Thanks, MaryKay. I appreciate it a great deal. And first and foremost, thank you and Laura and LTA, because during this time, the ability to gather together on so many of your calls and programs, in addition to the MLTC work, has really, created a special sense of shared purpose. So thank you for that always, but especially right now. And for everybody, forgive me for the reflection behind me. I had to move because of noise on our street, one of the perils of working at home. I do want to say that I came to OLT as the executive director shortly after accreditation was accomplished. And my colleagues who are on the call today, Abigail Lambert and Nick Rogers, played a substantial and phenomenal part in helping that come true. But really, within 2 or 3 weeks of when I started and I was introducing myself to state and federal agencies, the topic of accreditation didn't even have to come out of my mouth. It came out of their mouth. And it goes back to something that MaryKay was talking about, kind of I won't call it a shortcut, but the acknowledgement of that expectations have been met and fulfilled. So it's a really important tool that I think is highly worthwhile. Accreditation definitely made us stronger and more transparent, and let us put our own house in order. And, you know, not only does it do that, but it provides a framework for putting your house in order. You don't have to, whether it's in your strategic planning or your general operations, you don't have to say, now what areas do I need to focus on? That part is done for you. So that's a tremendous help, and is the value created by years and years of expertise and knowledge, which is fantastic. So, you know, for us, all policies and procedures were visited. The board had to focus on those and confront any deficiencies that they found, and that was important. So that was crucial looking inward. And in terms of looking outward, what I alluded to, the relationship with agencies and the relationship with other funders, it serves as a shortcut. MaryKay mentioned volunteers. I also think it's a selling point for prospective board members. You know, I think if you're going to talk to somebody about, you know, becoming a fiduciary on behalf of your organization, and you have the opportunity to say, you know, a lot of the things that you as a board member should be asking questions about, and let's face it, not all board members ask those questions, but should, you know, we are able to say, yeah, we've addressed those, and here's what we've done. And so it provides a benchmark for board members as well. It definitely strengthened the board and staff, because the board had to play a major part in the accreditation along with the staff, and let everybody play a role in terms of critical assessment of all our operations, from stewardship, as MaryKay said, to finance, to governance, to operations. I think as an accredited organization, we owe an obligation to others. And I think that's probably felt by most accredited land trusts. You know, this is not a competitive world. This is a world where we all benefit if everybody has better tools to do their work with. So, you know, recently I've started attending the Missouri Circuit Rider calls for other organizations that are looking at doing this, and we want to play our role in helping to encourage and further that exercise. I think, you know, what it makes me think about is, you know, you have to get your accreditation renewed every 5 years, but it makes me think about a continuous cycle of improvement, you know, and that's important. So by way of example, I recently asked our outside accounting firm. Well, first we went from a non-CPA outside firm to a CPA firm, and we're audited, of course. But I also, I said to the new firm, said, could you please keep track of all of the ways that we are improving our financial oversight, so that, you know, when we get to the point of renewal, we can say it's not just a static memo, but it's a progress list where we can say, here's where we were at accreditation, here's where we are now. So it's showing even more improvement. I think those are the most important things. I don't know if either of my colleagues, Nick or Abigail, have anything to add, but I think that's probably most of the stuff that we think about. So there you go, MaryKay.
Mary, thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate it. I do want to mention that, you know, Ozark Land Trust is in really good company. Most of the most of the national conservation groups that are working in Missouri are also accredited. Great Rivers Land Trust in Illinois that does work in Missouri is accredited. Kansas Land Trust that does work in Missouri is also accredited. So you're in really good company. I do want to give the last few minutes to Carol Davit. Here's the really, really good news is that just a few days ago, Missouri Prairie Foundation actually submitted their application for accreditation. So Carol, do you want to spend a couple of minutes giving advice or your experience with the accreditation process? And you're still muted.
There. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'll just speak very briefly because I think we don't have very much time, and there might be some questions from others. But yes, we submitted our application last week, or I think. Well, first I want to say what I learned most is that Sarah Naparella, who's the consultant who I worked with on this and who's going to be speaking in a moment, is a very patient woman because she put up with me through the whole process. But I think my comments are really echo the points that you made, MaryKay, in your great presentation, and many of Larry's observations in terms of the process of applying. Of course, I don't know if we'll be accredited. We're not accredited yet. But actually, when I started this, the whole process, it really wasn't with accreditation in mind, but it was with improved governance in mind and just making the organization stronger. I think that, as Larry said, I think he said, it helps staff and board members all kind of be on a level playing field, because sometimes you might have staff members or board members who feel really strongly about governance or about finance and others don't. But when you have a third party sort of seal of approval and this third party guidelines, then it puts everybody on the same, I mean, it's just helpful to have a third party saying these things, if that makes sense. And just the last thing I'd like to add, and I don't mean to counter this, MaryKay, but in terms of, it places more value and there's more recognition, I think that's true only if people understand what land trusts are and if they understand the value of accreditation. And that's where the work, I think, of state coalitions like this and individual land trusts have a role to play to continually educate our colleagues and the general public about what land trusts are and what accreditation means. Because if you don't know what something means, you can't really place value on it. And I continually, even among conservation colleagues, people, I think, still get confused about what it means to be a land trust. So I would just add that one little caveat that that we have to continually educate about those two things to perpetuate and build and sustain value to land trust and to the accreditation process.
Great. I thank you for that point. I think that's absolutely spot on, and we have to continue that charge. I did not think it's. Thank you, Carol and Larry, for sharing. I appreciate that. I didn't see any questions in chat, so I can shoot this back to Mike for you to introduce what comes next. Is that
That should work.
Great.
Looks like we have a Bonnie. You have a question, real quick?
Is there a cost for accreditation? Yes, there is a cost for accreditation. There is an accreditation application fee that is based, it's a sliding scale based on your operations budget. The other costs, though, are the staff time and perhaps professionals that you would need to hire. And I think that is a significant investment. Going through the accreditation process, it is rigorous. It should be rigorous, and there is a definite cost in staff and consultant time, as well as the accreditation fee itself. And there is an Accreditation Commission website. At the end of my slides are some resources for you, so when you get those, you'll see those resources. There is an Land Trust Accreditation Commission website that goes through the whole process of applying for accreditation.
MaryKay, I just wanted to state that I also put those links in the chat if anybody wants to take a look in breaks.
Thanks, Carol.
All right. I'm sorry to cut our Q&A time short, but in the interest of not taking everybody's whole day, I want to keep us moving along here. If you have questions, feel free to reach out. I'm sure MaryKay would be happy to answer them via email or if you send them to members of the steering committee, we'll be glad to connect them with folks who can answer them. With that, I want to hand things off here to James Cole of the Nature Conservancy, who is going to moderate our panel discussion on standards and practices. So, James, all yours.
Thank you. Can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me okay? Awesome, thank you. And just before I kick things off, just a couple notes on housekeeping. Mike and steering committee just wanted to offer my gratitude for the great work you're doing. I've led God knows how many Zoom meetings and calls over the last 3 months of physical distancing and quarantine and so forth. And it's at least for me, it's stressful. And just wanted to say thank you for the great job you're doing of facilitating and bringing people together. And I also wanted to thank all of our participants for being kind and patient as we work through technology and not being in person. I might be self-projecting. I would much rather be here in person with all of you than staring at you in the computer screen. But thank you everybody for taking part and just being patient with me in particular. A note on that, I do have my circumstances here. I do have a 2-year-old at home with me with daycare not being in, so you may see me disappear from the screen. I'm still going to be sitting here listening and talking, but having a 2-year-old at home, despite my wife being here too, is like having a wild animal running around occasionally. So you might see me shut off my camera just to cut down on distractions. So just want to let you know that. We do have till noon, and we have 3 excellent speakers. Thanks to our speakers for being part of this panel. But we have till noon. My goal is to have like a flow of discussion with our 3 speakers till about 11:30. And while they're doing that, please, please, please put your questions, thoughts, comments that you'd like to direct to our 3 experts in the chat, which again is being expertly navigated and compiled by Carol. And then Carol will be coming in at about 11:30 to share those questions out and make sure that we're directing the dialogue in a very particular way that fits everybody's needs. So, but for that, you know, myself and our 3 speakers, when we met to plan this out last week, we're trying to fathom like what's going to benefit everybody, but to really drill down and make it particular to your needs, make sure you populate the chat with questions, and we'll do our best to get to all of those in the back half of the hour. So hope that makes sense. So please participate through the chat. And thanks to Carol for coordinating that and facilitating that part of our discussion. So I would say MaryKay, Sarah, and Clint and I met last week to kind of pour over how to best do this. And without setting up expectations too high, it was a wonderful discussion. And I was able just to sit back and listen to our 3 panelists discuss in this very organic way standards and practices, and I learned a lot. And I hope that our discussion proceeds very akin to that. You have their biographies on screen. I'll just, I can't do their expertise and the qualifications justice just talking extemporaneously about who they are, but I did want to highlight a couple of things for each of our panelists. Clint joined Conservation Fund in 2008 and serves as the Midwest Project Director. As many of you know, he participates actively in the coalition, been part of our meetings over the last few years. His territory covers Dakotas, Nebraska, Missouri, Illinois, Wisconsin, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Iowa. He's the fund's lead on implementation of the Midwest Habitat Mitigation Project. He's a seasonal conservation professional, has worked since 1988 in land conservation and wildlife management from Alaska and Florida to the Great Plains. I want to underscore this. He is a recognized expert, negotiator, and facilitator. Just great to work with, working with federal, state, and local agencies, corporations, and families on complex real estate transactions, easements, mitigation, funding, and finance. He's also a commissioner with the Land Trust Accreditation Commission. Years ago, worked for the Nature Conservancy in the Dakotas, and he spent 12 years as a wildlife biologist and land manager. Our second panelist is Sarah Naparella, skilled at managing organizational change, developing and mentoring people, and managing complex projects. She's worked in the nonprofit research, technology, and education fields for over 20 years and in the land trust community. Served in leadership roles for Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy, including Director of Human Resources for 5 years, Director of Stewardship for 3 years. Extensive experience in creation, implementation, review of policies and procedures, and successfully led the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy through its accreditation process in 2009 and again in 2014. Today, Sarah supports land trusts as they plan and prepare for accreditation. And then MaryKay, who we met during our last presentation. I don't know if I want to, I feel like I'm eating away at our time. So I apologize, MaryKay, I'm not doing you kind of serving you short thrift, but I did highlight one thing, that you live in Northern Michigan and you love living there. And I wrote, who wouldn't? And then also that, again, totally short shrifting your qualifications, but I also saw your note about a quest to visit every Major League Baseball park. Have you been to the two in Missouri yet?
No, we have not, and this year is certainly putting a bit of a kibosh on our overall plans.
Yes.
But we did a long trip east of the Mississippi. Plans are, very quickly to do a west of the Mississippi trip to catch a whole bunch more.
Let us know when you're in town, please.
I will.
State. Yes, excellent. Hopefully we'll have seasons, but winning seasons when you're here. Okay, so I wanted to kick off maybe directing our first question to Clint, and then again inviting Sarah and MaryKay to transition and chime in and fill in the gaps. But Clint, again, from his perspective as a funder through the Conservation Fund, a partner for all of our land trusts, and also participant in Land Trust Coalition meetings the past few years, and a commissioner on the Accreditation Commission, I just wanted to invite Clint's perspective on the biggest challenges in Missouri across our partner groups on meeting the challenges of standards and practices. So Clint, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, thanks, James. Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, got it. First, thanks to James for moderating the session. Thank you to Cindy for her being a technical guru on this, and then to the Missouri Land Trust Coalition for inviting me to speak. And I do want to preface my comments by being thoughtful or mindful of the fact that we do have a significant number of agency folks, non-government folks that are on the phone. And so even though this particular part of this session is talking about adherence to standards and practices, what I've tried to do is to tailor my comments to, thinking about best practices in general, both for government agencies as well as for the nonprofit sector, and in particular land trusts. I work with state and federal agencies, local governments, a lot of local government work with over 100 land trusts across the Midwest. I see trends as a commissioner, and I want to thank Melissa Calverstrand for passing along some of the things that we see nationally. But I work on everything from providing funds to actually doing deals in partnership with organizations. So I see a lot of the strengths, a lot of the weaknesses in the organizations. MaryKay talked about it earlier. There's like 4 buckets that really your organization kind of focuses around, and those are governance, finance, stewardship, and transactions. And I'm going to touch on a little bit of each of those in my comments. And the one that I want to touch on first is, and again, this is applicable to government agencies as well, is sort of the finance side of it. In government, we get a little complacent that we're always going to have an annual operating budget. Nobody's going to interfere with that. We're always going to be able to take care of our land. In the land trust business, we tend to think of donors supporting us. We tend to think of ourselves as these nonprofits. What I'm going to propose, and what I do like to see when I work with land trusts, is start thinking more like a business that you are. Think about how is it that we can create a sustainable business model around our legal framework where we've already made a commitment to protect land or to manage conservation easements in perpetuity. Think about ways that you can perpetuate or sustain that business in the long term. And I always think of these organizations out there that have been around for a long time, like rural banks. How many rural banks have been out there for 150 years and have survived multiple recessions, continue to make money, continue to support their communities? What are they doing so special that we in the land trust community aren't? As a commissioner, we see a lot of really shaky land trusts out there who are struggling. Of all the things that I would say are probably the toughest for land trusts to get their head around is dealing with finances, in particular operating reserves, and how to deal with cash flow, how to report that back out to the board. So my quick advice on this piece is have a tight working relationship with your bankers and your accountants. Make sure they know who you are. Carol mentioned it earlier about getting the word out what a land trust is. Invite your bank president and their staff to come out and spend a day with you, and so that they understand who you are. So when you have to apply for a paycheck protection loan, you're going to be the first one in line because they're going to understand what you do. The other thing I think I want to mention, and this segues into my next comment too, is making sure you as staff or an ED really can explain your financials to your board and have board trainings on what the financials mean. It's absolutely critical to have those communications. And I think the same is true with government and the government staff, is that really understand what it costs to do a project. I think, and I just had this conversation with one of our government partners a week ago when we were talking about the conservation fund and how we work and how we charge fees. And I always get a surprise from an agency when I say, we're going to charge X amount of fee, and it's thousands, tens of thousands more than they say. Well, how can you charge that much? I said, think about what it takes to put paper in the copy machine, to pay the benefits, to get on an airplane, to do all those pieces, and you'll be surprised at what it really costs to do a project. Second thing I want to talk about is a little bit about governance, and this is in particular to board process. My main message here, and what I see as one of the tough spots for land trust, is appropriately documenting approvals and authorities. Particularly now in this time period of COVID-19 and pandemic restrictions, we have seen some land trusts are really struggling with, in their bylaws, can they meet via email? Can they meet via Zoom? How do we document that we do that? What do we need to do to make changes? I really, really encourage land trusts, and again, this bleeds over into, I think, government agencies, is really understand your approval process and what it takes, the communication structure that you need to have with the authorities or who has authority to make the approvals. And in particular, when it comes to that accreditation piece, make sure you understand how to document those, or make sure you have a system in place to document that so you can prove to someone else that you went through the process. I am big on written board authorities, written resolutions that document what's going on. I like having letters of intent. One of the things we do, because we work in partnership with groups a lot, is we put letters of intent together. Some see them as contracts. I see them as making sure we are really clear about who's providing what and who's doing what. Okay, I'm going to move into the second or the third part of the buckets that MaryKay mentioned, and that's the transactional side. One of my pet peeves, title work. Get title work as quickly as possible. It will not only will it determine the structure of your deal, and what I'll say about that is I'm working on a project right now where we thought it was going to be one contract with multiple, extended family members, and Ginny knows this well because I was complaining yesterday about the headache it's causing me. We're looking at 4 separate contracts For us, that means that it's 4 separate deals. I have to structure the appraisal 4 separate ways. There will be 4 separate cross-contingent closings. And on my side of it, internally, there's 4 separate approval processes that I have to go through. They're all cross-contingent each other. But until I looked at the title work and realized what we had going on, I could have started this project and been way down the road and realized, oh no, now I've got to restructure everything from an approval standpoint, from a contract standpoint. So get title work right away, and then make sure you update it prior to closing to make sure nothing has happened. And again, most of you are pretty good about this, but in standards and practices, it really emphasizes that. And then the last piece is documenting how the encumbrances that you get, that Schedule B of your title work, how those encumbrances or several mineral rights are addressed. You don't have to get rid of them in some cases, but you do have to show, or you should show to yourself how those encumbrances, several mineral rights, don't affect the conservation values or your ability to manage and steward that property in perpetuity. So clear those up before you get things completed. See if you can, and document the ones that you don't think are going to be an issue or a problem. On transactions too, and this is coming specifically from the Accreditation Commission, something that we see quite often, and it's mostly related to conservation easements, but also relates to those of it who are doing fee acquisitions, is in your baselines or in your property reports, make sure you link those, what you include, the contents of that baseline report with the restrictions in the conservation easement. Oftentimes we see conservation easements that say restrict building envelopes or talk about impervious surfaces, but there is absolutely no information in the baseline document that says how many square feet of impervious surface there is. There's no way to track it. There's no way to document it. You've got to be really, really thoughtful about what goes into those baseline documents. The other piece that I will add is making sure those baseline documents are contemporaneous with the closing of the project, because I can tell you from a commissioner's standpoint and an accreditation standpoint, that's one of the things that we look at is the dates that these things are completed. So my point on all this is, for your fee projects, for your easement projects, draft your documentation of the condition of the land with your easement or your land enforcement in mind, so that you're not missing something. I'm going to move on to my sort of last piece, which is the stewardship side of things. There's 2 messages here. One is annual monitoring. How do we do, or should we get out and do annual monitoring? Clearly, that's an important piece. It's an important piece from a standards and practices, but also from an accreditation standpoint. And there are some, and Carol's going to provide a link in the chat to the recommendations, the COVID-19 recommendations that come from the commission and how you can deal with some of these things. I understand it's challenging for this time period. I understand that it's challenging no matter what, but at the end of the day, you've got to make sure these properties that you have taken on a perpetual responsibility to either monitor from a easement standpoint or to steward or manage as part of your land portfolio are doing all right, that they're not deteriorating, that they're not, the easements have been violated. And the other piece of this, and this comes from having been a land manager, and those of you who are managing properties, it's an awesome way to meet your neighbors. If you haven't met your neighbors on all sides of your property, they are your future. First of all, they're going to look out for your property, but they're also going to be the future conservation opportunities. And you've got to get out. I can't tell you how many times I meet with state, particularly federal managers, who have never been on a piece of property, or have been on a piece of property, theirs, but they've never met the neighbors next door, have no idea who they are. That's how we make progress in conservation, is we plant these seeds of public land or properties, and then we expand out. So with that, I will wrap up and pass it along to Sarah, who's going to talk a little bit more about some of the other aspects of challenges of standards and practice, inheriting standards and practices.
Thanks, Clint. Can everybody hear me okay? We've been experiencing some winds, and there's like a lot of limbs down here and some traffic lights out. So just want to make sure that folks can hear me. I'm actually running my internet off my phone, so hopefully everything will work out. Anyways, thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate being asked to share some of my tips and tricks, and I'm going to speak specifically to sort of some nuts and bolts of the application process itself, and then wrap up with talking about the importance of institutionalizing standards and practices in your organization. I work with a lot of organizations that are making a lot of changes sometimes leading up to their accreditation application. And so they might be new for them. And so those got to be institutionalized over time, because renewal comes in 5 years. And so you want to make sure that you're going to be ready for that renewal. So institutionalizing standards and practices is really important. So I thought I'd talk about timeline first. I get asked a lot, like, how long is this going to take me? When should I start when it comes to the application? But I want to back up even a little bit more. And MaryKay mentioned those 4 buckets of work: governance, finance, stewardship, and transactions. And these are, there's assessments that's provided by Land Trust Alliance. Highly, highly recommend, if you've never done an assessment, to do an assessment. And it's basically just asking yourself, here's the standard and practice, how we doing? And going through that process for all standards and practices, not just the accreditation indicator elements. Now, you might have your sights set on accreditation. It could be 2 years down the road, 5 years. I just want to remind everybody, it's not a race, it's a journey. And I really do feel like all these years I've worked in land trust world and with the commission, it really is about continuous improvement. And so doing that assessment just gives you that helps you with that prioritization. I'll just say briefly, I've done assessments with groups, and sometimes it is accreditation. And so everything related to accreditation indicator elements get high priority. But I've also worked with groups where some of those become high priority, but because of where they're at in their journey as an organization, maybe they're prioritizing some items like they're going to do board evaluations every year, and they really want to invest in that. And they use that assessment tool to help them identify those priorities. And then they put that one on the top. Board evaluations are not an indicator element, but this organization I worked with in Indiana said, we want to invest in our board. We really feel like that's going to help us succeed in our accreditation application. So I like looking at the full spectrum of all standards and practices. With that being said, if you're moving towards that application, my number one tip is to review that application 1 year before it's due. So review the actual application 1 year before it's due. I do this with organizations, and it's amazing how much that reduces anxiety. They learn how much they've grown as an organization after doing an assessment. Maybe they're working along for a couple years. They review that application, and it reduces their anxiety. They can pull it apart, put some parameters around it, responsibility, who's going to do what. But doing it a year in advance, that gives you, what I like to say is, take 6 more months to put the bow on that the conflict of interest policy. Like, find out a few little nuggets that you need to tweak and fix. And then 6 months before the application's due, I like to use that time to now switch gears and now work on the application. Give yourself 6 months to do the main application. So that's sort of just a rough guidelines of how I like to work with folks. And like I said, I feel like it really helps reduce anxiety is to do that early in the process. Lastly, regarding timeline and process, I would just encourage everybody, and a tool, I'm going to recommend a tool. I would just really encourage anybody, if you are in the middle of doing a deal or about to do a deal, use a transaction checklist. If you've never used one and done a lot of deals, consider using one, especially if maybe using standards and practices more, the vernacular and the resources are a little more at your fingertips as an organization. Use this checklist, and I think Carol's going to put it in a link to it in the chat. But highly recommend, if you're in the middle of a deal, get the checklist, look backwards. Did we do everything up to this point? Is there anything we missed? If we did, can we do it now? And what do I need to do before closing, after closing? Those transaction checklists, I see them really help folks in that preparation for making sure they get all their due diligence done, and that's going to help them in the long run towards that accreditation application. Process-wise, how are we going to get this done? Who's going to do the work? How do you organize from all volunteer? And I've worked with all volunteer groups through first time and renewals. So there are all volunteer groups doing that, to minimal staff, to big staff. My best advice, if you are charging after and you're going to do that application, you're ready. My best advice is to put a detail-oriented person in leadership to lead the process. This is really not about title, or this is about skill set. It could be the executive director or board chair, but it really comes down to skill set. I was the director of stewardship when I led this process. I loved it, just because I'm that scheduler, spreadsheet, keep the task going. And I just said you're going to review the application 1 year before it's due. So you're tracking over that year where you're at. The one thing I'll mention with that is when you empower somebody to have that role in your organization, if it's a staff person, board member, volunteer, it's really important to support that person in the deadlines that they set, because I've also seen a person get empowered and then they say, hey, we have these deadlines and we need to meet these deadlines, only to see maybe a board chair, executive director say, oh, well, you know, those are soft, right? So you can cram for the exam, but highly recommend that if you're going to put that person in that role, really support and listen to what they're suggesting that you do. And again, detail-oriented person to lead that process. My next tip on organizing for doing an application is don't go it alone. Have a team. And this becomes really important for institutionalizing anything new that you're putting in place for standards and practices, and to get that renewal in 5 years. I've worked with organizations now for 5 years doing this work, and one thing I've noticed is when there's turnover and staff changes and board changes, or that volunteer that led the effort leaves, if you're not institutionalizing the work, if you don't have multiple people involved in the process, it will impact that renewal. So have multiple people involved. I like, again, back to those using those buckets: governance, finance, transactions, stewardship, and assigning those maybe to a committee, your finance committee, transactions to the land committee. Maybe you don't have a governance committee, but you could have your executive committee, or a board development committee is maybe looking at the governance. So you could assign and delegate that work to those committees. Which gets into the institutionalizing, which is my last point of institutionalizing standards and practices, and taking those buckets and not just assigning them, but writing them into the charters for those committees. Okay, so now you've said you're responsible, but what are the activities? You need to use the standards and practices, those 4 buckets. You need to have activities annually where you're reviewing the standards and practices annually. Or if you've done an assessment every year at your board retreat, you're getting it out and you're saying, how are we doing? We got to reprioritize. We've done these things. Celebrate the work. What are your new priorities? I'll also suggest, in order to help to institutionalize standards and practices, training and onboarding of board and staff to really get the standards and practices as part of your training. I work right now with a land trust in Northern Michigan, and I spend, every time they get a new staff person, I spend about an hour every other week for about 4 months, and they bring sort of what's on their plate, what they're learning. They ask me questions, and it's always through the lens of standards and practices. I love this executive directors really said, all new staff are getting trained through standards and practices, and I answer questions, provide resources, and so it's an opportunity for them to just put it out there and not feel like they got to know everything. And so they've invested in how they're training their staff. And I know some organizations are really using standards and practices as part of their onboarding with their staff, with their board members, and their orientation and training. So the next thing I'll just add in kind of relation to that is identify who your champions are for standards and practices. Ask for folks to be champions for standards and practices, and define what that means. And I'm thinking these are people at your board meeting. Maybe you're having a conversation about conservation planning and doing proactive conservation planning. Who is that person around the table that's going to say, hey, is there a standard and practice for that? And where are some resources that, or I think I've seen that in standards and practices. So they're really familiar with them. Or maybe you're doing a transaction, it's your first time you're dealing with the potential of environmental hazards. You might have to do a phase one. This isn't something you've normally done. And you need those champions around the table to say, is there a standard and practice for that? So, you know, have those folks identify who are those champions. And I think that'll help with some of the institutionalizing of standards and practices, and it just becomes part of the language that you use around the table. But I do think that it has to be intentional. And like I said, getting accredited is one thing, and putting in a lot of new stuff. I've worked with some organizations where they put in so much right up to their accreditation application, new stuff, internal controls, checklist, the transaction checklist, and they are concerned about renewal. And it's true, you know, those new things you put in place, you need to be able to continue. So having more people involved and making it part of your day-to-day, your annual work plans, create, you know, who's those champions again, to figure out how to best institutionalize that. And lastly, I'll leave it here was, if you're working on an application, reach out to the Land Trust Commission staff. They're amazing. They hear from me a lot, probably more than they want to, but they're amazing. I use their chat feature when you on there. They have a little, when you go on their website, there's like, ask me a question. And so I sometimes use that chat, or their info@landtrustaccreditation.org. They get back to you. They're awesome. Don't be afraid to reach out to them. They're not in the gotcha business. They really want to see land trust succeed, and they want that continuous improvement. And I feel it. I feel it in their values. I feel it in the way they talk. So don't be afraid to reach out to them. But with that, those are my tips and tricks. I'm sure you all have others you can share. Well, I'd love to hear from you. I'll pass that on to MaryKay, I think, is up next.
Great. James, Clint, Sarah, thank you so much. There's a couple of things that I want to play off of what you guys have said. It can be overwhelming, and we're in a place in our lives right now where we really have to keep an eye on ourselves, our organizations, our staff, our volunteers, to be careful that we're not being overwhelmed. And so I just want to reiterate Sarah's suggestion of go through an assessment, see where you are. You're going to get a lot of surprises that you are doing better than you think in some areas. And this is going to leave you with a checklist of things that you want to improve. And what's the timeline for that? It's not a race. So I think actually going through the assessment is anxiety reducing, because it'll give you a roadmap. This is what we're going to do to improve. And Clint is right. Like the accreditation process has given us a lot of information about those specific areas that land trusts continue to have trouble with. And when accreditation began, both the Land Trust Alliance, the commission, and land trusts themselves had a misperception of how land trusts were implementing standards and practices. We all thought everybody was doing a whole lot better. And when you came down, and so much of it is coming down to the documentation, you know, so I know we did that title report, but where is a copy of that? Who reviewed it? You know, did the attorney take a look? So a lot of it is just, again, professionalizing what we're doing as land trusts. So the other thing I want to say, and I think Clint alluded to this or said this, is there's no secret here with the standards. So we've got 12 standards. The first half apply to any nonprofit out there. The last half are real estate, planning, you know, due diligence on acquisitions, stewardship. The fact that we have this whole perpetuity thing kind of messes with that a little bit of making it more complicated. But the standards and practices rely on industry standards. So when we talk about fundraising, it's based on nonprofit fundraising. It's not based on anything a super secret club that got together to decide this is what we should be doing. So know that, again, it's not only the 1,000 land trusts out there coming together with collective wisdom, but the collective wisdom of the real estate industry, of tax professionals, of financial people and accountants and people who do organizational development work. So I think you'll feel a lot better if you take a look at how your organization is doing. And I've worked with a lot of land trusts on doing assessments, and it is very common that they are too hard on themselves. And we'll go through and, oh yeah, we're not good on that. And I'll say, but wait a minute. It says here that you do X, Y, Z. Do you do X, Y, Z? Yeah, but we want to do better. It's like, okay, you're doing the minimum and you want to do better. And that's every nonprofit person out there in the entire world. Standards and practices, most of them are a minimum bar, and most land trusts are doing more than that minimum bar. However, and the thing I want to talk about, and leave 15 minutes for questions, the thing I want to talk about are those softer, there's a lot of black and white. You do this, you don't do that. Always do this, never do that. And then there's the minimum bar stuff, but then there's a lot of aspirational goals and standards and practices as well. So things like transition planning. We're aging as a community. We're maturing, and we need to be ready for the next people who are going to take over. Do you have a transition plan for your board? Do you have transition plans for your staff? Are you going beyond that minimum for your board in, like Sarah said, onboard them, train them, get some mentors. You are going to see your boards take off like crazy if you can flatten out that learning curve and get them to a place where they are working at their best. Other things like personnel. Are you adequately caring for the staff people in your organization? Are you looking at benefits? We still have about 30% of land trusts that are not providing benefits to their staff members, benefits of health insurance, of retirement, of things that come along with your salary. Are you evaluating what good salaries are, and are you providing professional development for the people in your organization? Fundraising is another kind of soft, really, really difficult standard. Of it's almost impossible in standards and practices to say exactly what you need to be doing for fundraising. So most of standards and practices is going to talk about ethical fundraising, tracking, diversifying funds, that sort of thing. One of the things that we're seeing is that, and Clint said it, we're still seeing land trusts that are struggling to ensure their sustainability through financial health. Couple of other things, and actually I'm just going to talk about one. In the revisions of standards and practices in 2017, we for the first time included standards on community conservation, standards on diversity, equity, inclusion, standards on being welcoming, standards on, or practices, I should say, on making sure that your organization is representative of the community in which you live. I think what we're seeing in our world today is reflective of the need for us to really be paying attention to being welcoming organizations. So I'm super proud of the fact that the land trust community has put that right in standards and practices. We need to do a better job. We need to be representative of our communities. You're not going to have a boilerplate roadmap that says this is exactly how you do it, like you do with due diligence transactions, like you do with hazardous materials evaluations and title work, and writing a conservation easement. This is more complicated work. And I think as we are maturing as a community, it's the work that we're ready to take on, just like we're ready to take on climate through natural land solutions. We're ready to take on inclusivity and working with our communities to solve problems using conservation. That's what, to me, what community conservation is all about. So those are some of the softer areas I see that land trusts are struggling with. But I know that we've got some really good questions, so I'll turn that over to Carol. Carol, are you the one that's tracking that for us? Or is it James?
Yes, I can. There are a few questions here. They're for the whole panel. And there was an idea as well that I'll save to the end. One question here, are land trusts evaluated for having a conservation strategy that establishes a land trust's priorities for where to pursue easements or acquisitions? Is their conservation strategy evaluated?
I can start, but then I would love for James and Clint and Sarah to add on. Looking at standards and practices, there are a couple of things. One is that your mission outlines very generally what your organization is going to do. There's a standard, there's a practice on making sure that you have land protection criteria. That I always think of it as a funnel. Your mission's here, your land protection criteria is there. What are the things we would accept? And then your strategic conservation planning is looking strategically at your service area. What are the highest priorities for us to go out and get, to find a way to protect those lands? Those are in standards and practices. So I think the question though is related to, will you be evaluated on that for accreditation? And is that, I think
Well,
that's the
I
question.
don't know, but it came up during when Clint was speaking, so I'm assuming, maybe, let's see, did somebody give new? Yes.
Okay, all right, so Clint and Sarah, do you want to chime in on that?
The short answer is, the short answer is yes. Is it a critical part of the business? No. I mean, if I will say the piece of, I mean, when I say critical part, is one of the critical failures that we look at from an accreditation standpoint. I will say that the conservation plans, when it comes to strategic conservation plans that I've seen, have been all over the board. And so we don't go back and evaluate whether or not you've picked the right places. We just want to know that you've got something that's that you're focusing on. Hopefully that's helpful in answering that. So we don't evaluate. I mean, we don't go to Utah and try to figure out what the folks in Utah are trying to, are they saving the right things? No, that's not our role. The question is, do they have something? And Sarah has probably worked with people on preparing those or preparing for that. I think she better answer that too.
Well, I think with the application, for accreditation, you attach your project selection criteria, right? That's what you give the commission, but you are not required to give them your conservation plan and the proactive strategy that you might have. And you've seen the applications, Clint, so, but I think that's what the actual requirement is.
Yeah, and a lot of people send in both, and generally it's, as long as generally what I've seen, and again, staff mainly handles that piece. We're not asked as commissioners to look in the details of those. That I've seen various levels of sophistication on project levels criteria, as well as long-term planning. And so, but I've rarely seen that as a problematic place, unless usually there's more systemic problems in a land trust that raise the commission's eyebrows, and that would add into it. So
I really think too that we're talking about moving from proficiency to excellence. When we're talking about, you need to have something in place to really going a step above to studying your service area and true evaluation. So the minimum, having that plan in place is proficient. But there's so many land trusts out there that are really, moving higher than that and beyond that. The other thing that to keep in mind from a standards and practices standpoint is, with the 1,000 land trusts across the country, we have amazing diversity. We have land trusts in Missouri that are working on urban gardens. And we have land trusts in Missouri that are protecting 10,000 acres of land. So, you know, of natural forest land. So there's no way that the Land Trust Alliance or the Land Trust Accreditation Commission could tell any individual land trust, no, you should be doing this instead of that. That's really going to be up to the land trust to decide.
Sarah, did you have something to add to that question? Okay.
No.
There's another question. Is it common for land trusts to work together and also in collaboration with state conservation agencies on their conservation strategies and planning? And again, it's to the whole panel.
This is Clint. I can tackle that from what I see in various states. So this short answer is yes. That's very common. Is it, you know, and so what I see common in a lot of other states, a lot of the land trusts get together because they have common interests, and most state DNRs, or in Missouri's case, the Missouri Department of Conservation, do invite land trusts to the table to talk, especially when they're going through their conservation planning process. So yeah, it's very common to do that. I would say in land trusts who, smaller land trusts tend to get ignored by other folks. If I were to place, you know, say something generalistic, that if you are a very small land trust focusing on a either narrow conservation niche or a narrow geography, you sometimes, and you probably who are in that place, may often get overlooked. I think the same is true with local governments who are doing terrific work but oftentimes get overlooked. That's partly why I really like the coalition's efforts. And I think of the, one of the strongest ones we have regionally is in Wisconsin with Gathering Waters Conservancy, where they help even the smallest land trusts have a voice on a state level and get attention. So I think that's a really powerful opportunity, in particular when it comes to the smaller groups. So hopefully, the short answer is yes. The longer answer is it's a little more complicated about do people work well or do people work together.
Sarah or MaryKay?
The only thing that I would add is that it is also dependent on the state DNRs or the Department of Conservation in each state and how strong they are. And in Missouri, and Ginny Moore just made this this point, that the Missouri Department of Conservation does a really good job of including land trusts in their conservation planning. One of the things that land trusts take advantage of is the power that and the expertise that the states have in planning. So you know, there's no reason for a land trust to go and redo a study on riparian areas if the state agency has already done that. They use that information, and that's where a lot of the collaboration can take place. So I think, and James, you might be able to speak to this as someone in Missouri. It feels like there's just a really good relationship between the state and land trusts.
Yeah, definitely. And I would just, without like trying to parlay this into something transactional, but I do know that MDC did create a land protection fund last year and actively sought guidance from the land trust community on what the priorities should be, what the parameters would be amenable for application. Yeah, so just incredible active partnership. And they, of course, have their own priority geographies that overlap with so many of the areas that all of our land trusts work in. So opportunities in hand, but also continued opportunities growing and moving forward. So definitely.
Sarah, did you want to comment?
No, my brain probably, I'm a implementer doer. My brain goes right to, if you're going to do partnerships, there's a standard and practice for that. So, and you know, Clint mentioned earlier partnership agreements, and some see those as contracts, but I'm a big fan of partnership agreements, non-binding partnership agreements that just lay out, here's our collective goals, here's what we're going to do, here's what you're going to do. I've just worked with a lot of organizations and things are humming along smoothly. They think they don't need them, but it's when things start to get bumpy. It's a great document and a tool to come back to and revisit. And there's resources available for that regarding partnership agreements.
I just wanted to share a couple of other comments that were shared. Clint agreed with Ginny about that in regard to MDC, including land trust perspectives in their conservation planning, and Clint says other states do not value their NGO community as much. And then in regard to James's mentioning the land acquisition fund, Gus says we're close to releasing an update on our MDC priority landscape delineations using partner contributions. Stay tuned for more. And we're happy to visit any time in terms of what we can do to help you and what we can learn from you too. And Gus will be speaking later today. I don't think I see any other questions except that relate specifically to the panel, but Carla had an excellent point. I mean, it does relate to the panel, but about creating a resource of a pool of professionals that we can use to help or call on to conduct land trust business, attorneys, legal counsel, appraisers, CPAs, natural resource professionals for biological assessments, etc. And then Larry suggests that we could potentially have a member section on the planned website for the coalition, and Ginny pointed out perhaps as a coalition we could develop that list of resources. And I just wanted to point out too that Sarah mentioned about the transaction checklist, and I posted that. And then she also shared some other resources as well, and 5 others, and those I posted. And then when MaryKay was talking about salaries and benefits, I posted about the LTA salary survey results, which might be helpful. If anybody sees any questions that I missed, do send in a chat, but I think those were all of the questions that came in.
Okay, very good. And we are right on time. Before I turn it back over to Mike, we just got another question from Jenny. Will we circulate the chat list with resources links after this meeting? I believe the answer is yes on that. So we'll collate those. Mike gives us thumbs up. Thank you for affirming. I didn't want to stick our neck out too far, Mike. But I also just wanted to thank our panelists, MaryKay, Sarah, Clint. It's just been truly a joy working with you over the last 2 weeks, preparing for this and delivering on the panel. Be remiss if I didn't mention these are like really challenging times: COVID, racism, inequality, unrest, and MaryKay, I know you mentioned it, but Sarah and I think Clint also touched on it. Like, our work is meant to be in perpetuity. So, doing something permanent, proactive, and beautiful for the planet. And in times like this, I think our mission needs to evolve, but it also encompasses the importance of that. And I just wanted to say thank you for your expert guidance and being such great resources for us as we try to navigate and evolve within these new conditions that our consciousness is awakening to also. So deep thanks, and also a deep thanks to the coalition for bringing us all together to discuss these important topics. So thank you, MaryKay, Sarah, and Clint. Really appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you so much, James, for facilitating that. That was outstanding and informative. I hope everybody else found it to be as useful as I did. To the question being circulated, we will collate all those resources. You can also hit, if you look in the bottom right corner of the chat portion of your window, there's a little ellipsis, 3 dots button. If you hit that, there's an option to save the chat as well. So we are gonna keep the ball rolling, I think, as we move on into the committee reports section of the agenda. We're going to just do a couple quick things here, and then the lion's share of the committee reports portion will be covered by the communications committee, who has lots of good stuff to report. So I'm going to kick this part off talking about the education committee. So let me share my screen here. All right, is that showing up for everybody? All right, I see some thumbs up. So the education committee has been working really hard and trying to line up some options, and obviously that's been a bit of a moving target based on just the constant revisions that the program has gone through to take into account COVID and everything else that's going on. The advantage, sort of the silver lining in all of this, is that because we have this nice, because instead of having one day, we now have a series of 4 days, which gives us the opportunity to do more programming than we might have been able to fit into one day. And it gives us the ability to accommodate the schedules of some presenters who are unavailable for the original planned meeting today. So to that end, the committee has identified a set of 8 potential workshop options. These are envisioned to be like 1-hour presentations as part of a program like today's meeting. And we're going to just do a quick poll where you can select 3 of the 8 options that you would like to see. And then obviously we're still sort of contingent on everybody's availability, but we're going to do our best to accommodate the input of the coalition membership and present programs that are interesting to you. So to that end, I'm going to just run through and give you like a 10-second summary of what each of these programs is about. The first one on the list, the cultural competence and implicit bias, is something that that's a training that I participated in through the University of Missouri's Law School here in early this year. And essentially, Professor Chuck Henson was I forget his title. He's a professor at the law school, but he was an administrator for equity following all of the University of Missouri protests in 2015. He has outstanding credentials. He's a great presenter. And the implicit bias is basically about the shortcuts that our brains build automatically to help us process information, and the way that those affect how we interact with people. So even if we consciously think of ourselves as being fundamentally anti-racist or unracist, we exist in a system that programs our brains in certain ways. And it's about identifying the problems with these shortcuts that our brains use unconsciously and adapting accordingly. So option number 1. Option number 2 is about a presentation by one of our member organizations, the History of Pioneer Forest and the LAD Foundation. LAD and Pioneer Forest are really a unique case in land trusts, not just in Missouri, but I think nationwide. If I'm not mistaken, LAD and Pioneer Forest are the largest non-state landowner in the state of Missouri. And they do a lot of fascinating things. And so Greg, I believe his title is board liaison, is available to talk to us about who they are, what they do, and why. Number 3, conservation advocacy with Tyler Schwartz, another member of the coalition. Tyler is the ED at the Conservation Federation of Missouri, just talking about how to effectively advocate for conservation causes and policies in the state. Number 4, climate resilience in the lower Mississippi River Basin. Kelly O'Mara is an outgoing staff member at Ozark Land Trust who's been doing a lot of work on climate resilience. There's some new data, I believe, being developed in cooperation with TNC. She's able to present about. Number 5, Audubon Society has begun rolling out a conservation ranching program. This is a program that certifies ranching operations that are friendly to native birds. So there's a variety of practices that go into that, and then it's an opportunity to see conservation working in cooperation with business to both's benefit. Number 6, just generally talking about working inclusiveness and equity in a conservation context with Sarah Ash of, I'm scrambling her organization's name, but sorry about that, Sarah, if you're on here. So again, a presentation from a member organization. Number 7, just an overview of a funding program. For example, the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program operated by NRCS, and we'd probably work with the agency to identify a presenter. The final possibility is conservation in an urban context. Dr. Charles Nyland is a member of the faculty at the University of Missouri who studies this specifically and has done presentations recently grappling with conservation in an urban context, but also the difference in experiences along racial and cultural lines with how does the African American community interact with green space. So there are 8 really good options there. If I'm not mistaken, the poll will have the opportunity to sort of write in. If not, put it in the chat. So if I could, Cindy, do I need to do anything to allow us to get the poll up here?
I just opened it right now, so it should be up. There is not an option to add in here, but do please use the chat feature to suggest other options here. If you can choose your top 3, and we'll see these tallying here in just a few minutes.
And while you're filling those out, if you have any questions, please feel free to put those into the chat as well. Gateway Greening, thank you, Cindy.
Mike, this is Jill Erickson. I might just chime in as well while we're letting people review that and vote on the poll, that if anybody wants to be involved in the education committee, we're very open to encouraging anyone to let Mike know and the other members of the committee know that we would love you to participate.
Absolutely. There's opportunity to get engaged with any of these 3 committees that are gonna report in the next few minutes here. So I don't think I was originally chair of the education committee, but I sort of ended up that way by sheer luck, I guess. So I will be happy to do that. We'll talk a little bit about advocacy, and Larry has been handling the communications committee. So I see Carol was not seeing. Is everybody seeing the poll? Did everybody have the opportunity to fill that out?
Mike, it looks like about 2/3 of folks have voted, so I do think it's hopefully getting to everybody now.
Excellent. If you're having trouble, please let me know. We want to give everybody an opportunity to weigh in on this.
This is Susan Slaughter. I'm having trouble submitting. I was able to figure out how to get items checked, but I'm having trouble getting access to submit because I don't seem to have a cursor, and submit doesn't highlight when I get near it.
Huh, that's very strange. Cindy, do you have any?
Yeah, I'm not sure why that would be. I wonder if anybody else has overcome that particular issue, if they wanted to chime in and give Susan a tip there.
As I moved down the list, the areas became grayed, and then if I clicked on the gray, all of a sudden the check marks appeared. But for submit, nothing seems to work.
Susan, there should be a submit button. I wonder if it's
There's a red submit button, and I can't get, because I don't have a cursor, I can't be sure I'm on top of it, but I'm trying to get onto it, by moving my finger all over my keypad, and I can't get it to do anything.
Try scrolling down with your down arrow.
That isn't working.
You can email me your 3 ideas and we'll make sure they get into the mix. How about that?
Okay, and who is this?
Oh, I'm so sorry, Jill Erickson. So just reply to the reminder emails I've been pestering you with.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll be sure. If you're having trouble, please do that. And also noted, once you hit submit, the window will disappear, and then I believe when we're done, Cindy will be able to publish those results if folks would like to see them. So, has everybody had a chance now to fill those out? We'll take that all, that'll be really helpful to help us to get a priority list together. So thanks everybody for participating in that. With that, I think we can move on to the next little bit here, and so I'm going to run the PowerPoint, but I'm going to hand the presentation off to Gus from the Department of Conservation. So.
Thank you, Mike. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, very good. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. This has been a great program, a lot packed into a few short hours, and I really appreciate having a little bit of real estate here. I won't take any more time than necessary, but basically what I want to talk about a little bit, several of you know that last year we launched for the first time Missouri's Land Conservation Partnership Grant. And what I want to do just for the next 5 or 10 minutes is just spend a few minutes going over what the grant is about, how things went with our first request for proposals last year, what our plans are for this coming year, and then provide a opportunity for any feedback on how we can improve the program. So go ahead, Mike. Okay, so as far as what the program is, in terms of our goal, what we really are hoping to do with this program is to actively work with partners. You know, we recognize that the conservation department, we can do a lot, but there's no way we can get anywhere close to having the impact that needs to be made for conserving Missouri's fish forest and wildlife resources without engaging partners. And you guys are so important in so many different ways. So with this program, we're really trying to engage partners to maximize impact in the state, both to conserve important conservation landscapes for wildlife and water resources, forestry, other ecosystem services, and then also to connect people to nature by making conservation lands and opportunities available for public outdoor recreation. Go ahead, Mike. So again, last November, we launched our first call for proposals. When we did that, basically with this first round, we had 3 different sub-programs of our Land Conservation Partnership Grant. The first one focused on fee title land acquisition, where basically we would provide assistance to partners who wanted to purchase strategic grounds or lands that they would. The idea was that they would own those lands in perpetuity, or at least they would be kept in conservation ownership in perpetuity for conservation purposes and or outdoor recreation purposes. So that's the first category there. We would provide up to 75% of the land value for those projects, and then also cover the cost of an appraisal with them. The second category was providing support for conservation easements, focusing really on donated conservation easements. So as you all know, even though an entity or a landowner might be willing to donate a conservation easement, there's a whole lot of additional costs that go into making that happen. And that can a lot of times be the roadblock that keeps those projects from happening. And so we were trying to eliminate that hurdle by providing essentially, in a lot of cases, the entire cost of those different needs to make those projects happen for donated easements. And then the third category is what we call the kitchen sink program. And I think we're going to tweak that name because it was a little bit too broad, I think. But really the idea there is looking for different land conservation innovations, and then also opportunities to create new outdoor recreation opportunities for Missouri citizens. So we launched, we had kind of a soft opening rollout. We didn't shout it off the mountaintops necessarily, but we did provide an email to this group and a few other folks as well. And through that, we were really pleased with what came from that. We had 17 applications come through our formal request for proposals. But we also had one come out outside of that call for proposals. And that's something that I should mention is we do have a mechanism in place through this program. You know, we recognize our goal for this project is to have one request for proposals per year, but we also recognize that there are unique circumstances when there's opportunities that come up on short notice that aren't going to last very long. And so when those unique circumstances come about, we have the opportunity to consider those outside of the formal RFP as well. But so through that, we had four different land acquisition proposals submitted, and all four of those we awarded grants. I'm not going to call out any organizations that we awarded grants to. I don't want to steal any thunder, but I will just kind of give a brief glimpse into what these projects look like. So one of those was basically a conservation in holding along Current River. We're excited about. Another is about 300 acres down by Sykeston, which includes a huge block of, well, relatively speaking, of sand prairie. That's one of Missouri's most unique habitat types, and right next to kind of an underserved community. Another is a 10-acre community forest within the city limits of Ozark, Missouri, right close to their downtown area. And then the last one is basically a levee setback program where basically about 400 acres is going to be reunited with the river again, and turned into wetland and conservation management. So I'm really excited about those. We had two different conservation easement projects that were submitted. One is 250 acres on the Huzaw Creek within Shoal Creek priority geography, which we're really excited about. Another is 15 acres on Bull Creek, which is another priority landscape for us down in Southwest Missouri. And then finally, we had four different kitchen sink projects. I'm not going to go into what all those are or were about, but one of those was actually with the Missouri Land Trust Coalition, providing support for both the series of meetings we're enjoying right now, and then also for website development that Land Trust Coalition has in mind. So, like I said, I was really pleased with how things rolled out and what came in terms of projects. And in many ways, things have really gone smoothly since then. COVID-19 absolutely impacted us. There's some projects that we had to significantly delay. There's a couple that we're not entirely sure if they're going to happen, but I think the vast majority will happen. We had to rework a couple of agreements. It's all just part of it. You know, any of these projects are complicated and they take a few twists and turns, and we're rolling with it. But the bottom line is this first RFP quickly demonstrated the value of the program, and really excited about continuing it on into the future. Go ahead, Mike. Okay, so as far as FY21, our fiscal year starts July 1st. So we're within a few weeks of our next fiscal year starting up. The Conservation Department, like many different organizations, including yours, are definitely experiencing some unusual gyrations in budgets right now. We have two going on right now. One is just that with the unknown surrounding our budget, we've had to scale our budget back some. The other is that the legislature, when they approved budgets this last year, they did not appropriate they didn't appropriate any of our land acquisition budget, which is the same pot of funds that has been funding our land conservation partnership grant. We feel pretty strongly that some of those decisions were not constitutional, and we're working through those processes. So that does not mean that we won't have a program in FY21. It just means we have to work through a couple of things to make it happen. And there's just those kind of squirrely realities that we face as we get through this. But that being said, we do anticipate continuing to roll out a new request for proposals right around September 1st. With that, we are still hopeful that we will continue to be able to have the land acquisition portion of the program in FY21, but in all likelihood, probably we'll have a lot lower ceiling per project of what we can provide. We're currently looking at that may be around $200,000, but that's these are dynamic times, so it's good to be flexible, and we'll just kind of see how things roll out. We will absolutely still include, well, at least I fully anticipate, we will still include a conservation easement program, and I really hope to see some more applications come in for that program next year. I think that's as far as making a big impact with lower dollars, it's hard to beat that mechanism there. So, and then as far as our kitchen sink program is concerned, like I said, we're going to change that slightly to where it's a little bit more specific what we have in mind there. We're going to break that out into two different programs, one being a land conservation innovations program, and then the other being an outdoor recreations program. So we do anticipate rolling out those 4 different sub-programs within the Land Conservation Partnership Grant, again, somewhere around September 1st. So, and I've already heard about some projects that are brewing, and they sound really exciting. And so I guess I just encourage you to be thinking, be looking for the announcement when it comes out here in a couple of months, and I can't wait to see what comes out of the woodwork for that. So go ahead, Mike. So finally, just what I wanted to point out is, the Conservation Department is always looking for ways that we can improve our programs, but especially with this program, since this is the first year that we've ever done it, we're on the learning curve, absolutely, and looking for ways that we can improve. We already have some adjustments planned. One I already mentioned, but the other thing, we had a mechanism in place. We had a requirement in place for over a certain threshold. We required 2 appraisals. That made things pretty complicated, so we scaled that back to 1 appraisal now. We also adjusted the timing of our rollout so it worked better, provide more time for partners to get projects done in that given fiscal year, for example. But I'm sure there are other things that we could improve upon as well, and we appreciate any suggestions and feedback you might have. So I know we don't really have time to go through feedback right now through this forum, but I would encourage any of you that have any ideas for ways that we could improve the project or the program, to submit those to me if you could by July 15th. I'm certainly willing to visit with anybody after July 15th, but in order to have the greatest chance of being able to have those thoughts considered for our next RFP, July 15th would be great. You can email those to me, or you can call me. Both of those contacts are listed on the screen there. If anybody has any specific questions, I'd be happy to entertain them, although I know we're really short on time. And outside of that, I just want to say, we couldn't do all this without all the great work that you all do, and I just can't say enough how much I appreciate everything that you guys do to advance conservation in Missouri. So with that, just thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Gus, for updating, and I know you have worked long and hard getting this all put together. So thank you so much for all the work you've put in on this and for being here to present today. In the interest of time, I'm going to relay. We had one question in the comments. I'm going to relay that, and then we're just going to keep the ball rolling. Clint wanted to know, if the current year projects fail, will you be able to roll the funds into other projects or add them to the future years, or make them available in other ways?
Okay, yeah. So fiscal year, really our funding starts over with the fiscal year. So there's some projects that we extended into the next fiscal year, but any projects for FY20 that weren't completed, those funds really just kind of go back into the black hole, and we will kind of have a fresh start with FY21 coming up here. So
wonderful. All right, well, I'm going to drop out of screen sharing here. Thank you again, Gus, and I'd encourage everybody to think creatively. We had really good luck working with Gus in the Department of Conservation, and I know the other organizations that have applied would say the same. So with that, I'm going to try to keep us moving pretty quickly here. The Advocacy Committee, this is going to be a real short update. It was basically defunct this year. We had some confusion about who was leading that committee, and as a result, no one was leading that committee. So that committee didn't exist. But I think we're all in agreement that advocating for conservation is something that's a priority for this organization. So I just wanted to say, if you were interested in being on that committee, or particularly in chairing that committee, please let us know. You don't have to make a decision today, but this is work that we'll be doing at a future one of these meetings. So please be in touch with the steering committee on that. And then finally, before we head off to the communications committee, we're going to have a real quick presentation from Robin Rotman and Sarah Brown from the University of Missouri. And I believe I have that pulled up. Where are you? There you are. Get your slide up here.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everyone. We really just have this one slide. As Mike said, my name is Robin Rotman, and I'm a professor at the University of Missouri in the School of Natural Resources. I practiced environmental and land use law for about 10 years before taking up this position at Mizzou in 2018. Together with my colleague, Sonia Wilhelm-Stanis, who's not able to join the meeting today, we're both supervising Sarah Brown, who is our graduate research assistant. And Sarah will be doing her master's thesis project related to conservation easements. And so I wanted to turn it over to Sarah to just explain what the project will be about. And then we're going to ask for your help in implementing it. Sarah, go ahead.
Hey everybody. Yeah, so our project has a goal of gaining insights into Missouri landowners' motivations for placing their land under conservation easements. Also, the barriers that they experienced during the process, as well as the perceptions and takeaways from their experience. So to accomplish this, we're planning on conducting interviews later this summer and into the fall with landowners that possess property with conservation easements. It's our hope that these results from the study will be useful to professionals like yourselves, and more broadly, we hope that it will help start to increase the adoption of conservation easements in the state. So because we're aiming to interview landowners with conservation easements already placed on their land, we see value in utilizing the relationships that landowners already have with their easement holders. So to this point, we would like to ask for your assistance from the easement holders in contacting these landowners that might be, that already have conservation easements on their property, that might be willing and interested in participating in our study. So to keep this short and sweet, in the near future, we're going to be distributing a formal letter that's going to further outline this request for your assistance. And if you have questions, our contact information will be in that letter, and then we can also provide it in the chat. But don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Robin if you have any questions on the study or on what we're asking of you.
Sarah?
Yes.
If there's any immediate questions, we're happy to take them now, but I know the time is limited, so we just appreciate the opportunity. Very good. Thanks, Mike.
Absolutely. Thank you for the work you're doing and for jumping on the meeting today. Yeah, I'll be working with Robin and Sarah and Sonia to get that information out. So we just wanted to do a quick intro so that when you get an email here in the next week or two, you don't put it in your spam folder. But not seeing any questions on that, we'll just keep right on rolling here, and I will hand it off to Larry Levin of Ozark Land Trust, who is the Communications Committee Chair. So Larry, it's all yours.
Thanks. Can everybody see my screen now? Great. I appreciate it. And I want to thank Mike and Jill and Cindy, and everybody has been so incredibly helpful in getting this meeting together and all the resources needed to do it. I'm going to zip through pretty quick because I know everybody's time is very precious. This is the result of several meetings during the year. Started at last year's meeting and continued through with phone meetings in the fall, in-person meeting in Kansas City in the winter, many emails and responses back and forth. And I want to thank Jill and Natasha and Carla for all their help in envisioning in where we are on communication. We began the plan for what strategic communication should look like with Missouri Land Trust Coalition. And the three big areas we wanted to focus on were audience and messaging and methods of communication. And in the fall, we, as Gus indicated, we applied for and we received one of the partners grants, both for the conference and the website, and a huge and big thank you to MDC and Gus and his colleagues for supporting us in this endeavor. So what we want to do going forward is tell you a little bit about our focus areas and get your input. We want to start to develop common and useful language. I think Carol previously talked about having people understand what land trusts are, what conservation easements are. We want to figure out what the best kind of storytelling is for the work that we do. We're going to, after we get input and hopefully more participants for our committee, retain a website consultant and prepare a website for review. And then we're going to, as I indicated, hopefully add additional members who are interested in helping us through that process. So the first thing we wanted to look at is audience and who we want to reach out to. Internal, external audiences. How can we broaden the message of what the land trusts who are part and our partners who are part of this coalition do? How do we tell our stories, the messaging of that, and what best benefits the sector and complements the work that each individual organization is doing? And then the methodologies. What platforms do we use to tell those stories and reach what we have determined are our key audiences? So we're trying to figure out which some of the key audiences are for communications, and there are several. Certainly for landowners to know what opportunities exist for protection of their land. The general public who probably don't have a lot of knowledge. If you walk into a Starbucks or a Panera and ask people what a land trust or conservation easement are, they're not likely to be able to tell you that. Our agency partners, we have several on the call today, and they're great partners, but that doesn't mean that there aren't partners who don't know what we do. And we talked about during our brainstorming that especially is true at the county and local level. Our partners and funders from a foundation perspective and other perspectives, and then other audiences that we need to think about that maybe we haven't to date. So we thought with that in mind, we might do one quick poll that Cindy has to ask you all how you would, which you would choose as the most important audiences. So with that, Cindy, if you want to put up the first poll, and people can tell us kind of what their what your choices are in that regard. Which are your priorities? We'll wait a minute and she'll collect that information, and then we'll have some more data from you. I'm answering it myself. Cindy, tell me when you think we've gotten enough feedback.
Okay, we'll do. We're at about half right now.
Okay. And I must apologize. My slides are the least pretty of all the ones that have been done today. So kudos to those who have better graphic design taste and abilities than I do.
And as before, if you have any trouble submitting your poll, or if you want to add a comment for other audiences you think we should target, feel free to use the chat to record that information.
And we'll, of course, let people know what the results are as we move forward.
Yep.
Ready, Cindy?
Yeah, it looks like we're good. We'll so we'll pull end this poll right now. I think.
Okay, good.
See
So
the results there.
That's good. So it looks like there's a pretty even split among 3 constituent audiences, and that's good data for us to have as we continue our conversations in envisioning our outreach. So thank you for that very much. Okay. Then messaging for our communications, how we talk about what land trusts are, what we do, and who we serve. What are some of the commonalities of what we do and the variances in what we do? Geography, where and how do we each work? That is hardly coextensive for each of our organizations. So I think that's very important messaging for us to make sure that people know. Figuring out what kind of stories resonate with our key audiences. Those stories may be very different for different targeted audiences. So we want to study that as we build our outreach. And then what will best build knowledge and awareness, respect and support for our sector? Again, this is partly audience dependent, but we'll have a lot of discussions going forward. We already have had discussions, and we'll have more going forward about this. And as we present kind of our outreach platforms to you, we can gain more input and perspective from you there. And Cindy, I think we had another one to run real quick. Do you tell us which kind of messaging you think is most important? And we just eclipsed several of these here to limit the choices. So explanations to tell people about what our work is, who we are, and what we do. Information about each member and constituent organization, and then geographic data on what we do and how we do it across the state. So let us know what your thoughts are with respect to that, and we'll give you another minute there.
All right, it looks like we're holding steady with the number of respondents right now, so I think we'll
Okay, let her rip.
that one, and we'll share those results out.
All right, so the information on each member organization does not seem to be a priority. That's a pretty clear message, so thank you guys. That doesn't mean it won't be part of our messaging, but this helps us in terms of weighing the information and determining what's most important for people to see, so thanks for that. What we concluded as part of our group discussions was, as I alluded to, how little the general public knows and that basic knowledge that's needed. We all felt that landowners learn best through stories of success with other landowners, and that's something that can be highlighted as we go forward. We determined that some agency partners, probably not those who are on our call today, but maybe others who we don't have as regular interaction with, may not know the breadth and scope of our work. And then funders, we are not sure whether general environmental or conservation funders, necessarily all get the work we do. They may get it more at a national level and maybe not as much at a local level. So those were some of our preliminary thoughts coming into this discussion and your input helps us a lot going out of this discussion. We talked a lot about methods of communication. Telling our stories through existing publications and media, whether it's through through content, organic content, or paid content. Effective PR partnerships through groups. I just threw out one example, through the Missouri Outdoor Communicators and others. Social media platforms, email blasts, website, and events. We didn't go in with an assumption about which platforms were better or worse, but we wanted to create the universe of possibilities and discuss what would cause us to have the most success. And part of that depended on hearing from you about audiences and messaging. So I think with this, we had our third and final slide. Is that right, Cindy?
Yep, should be seeing it now.
Yep. So we eclipsed these again a little bit into 4 categories, so let us know what you think about these 4. This will be interesting because we definitely had opinions and they resulted in where we are today.
Looks like we've got about 2/3 of our respondents.
Okay, we can let it rip there, I think.
Okay. Yep, there's a few more coming in. I'll leave it up for another few seconds.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, looks like things haven't changed there, so we'll share that out.
Okay, so the website was, as we probably suspected, a priority, but I'll talk just briefly about that as we go forward. So thanks so much, Cindy.
You bet.
Talking about a website, right? So, as we note, many of the effective state land trust alliances have them. We started by talking primarily about social media, but evolved to the importance of a website as a landing place for many other things that can then be utilized for outreach. There's brand new page up that Artist Fry and others worked on at the LTA for state groups, and there's a link here, and I think Carol Davit also has that link that she can share for folks in the chat. The web, content can serve as the foundation, as I said, for social media and other platforms that allows, unified and easy access location for our storytelling. I see it as a rising tide, that not only identifies each member and what they do, but it tells very powerful stories about the sector, promotes our partnerships, as we were talking about collaborations previously, and creates strong identity for the sector in Missouri. The identity, I think, is strong amongst those on the call today, but not necessarily as a public presence. And we can, I think, do a lot more as far as that is concerned, and not in any way, shape, or form displace the individual work that any of us do, but lift it up and collectively make our presence better known. 3 quick examples of good websites that are that you can see through the Land Trust Alliance links, the state association links. Here's a cover for the Oregon group, the Oregon Land Trust group, and you can see kind of how they promote and focus their work. Then you see the Pennsylvania Land Trust Association, and they're a little more newsy on the top half, above the fold, as we say in the journalism lingo. And then the main, which is a little bit of a hybrid of the two. And there are many choices, and this is what we'll be talking about with our discussion. And Carol should have the links for all 3 of those that she'll put in the chat. That's kind of it in a nutshell. I am happy to entertain questions or thoughts. What we really would love to have is more people from the group who are willing to participate in this. The committee will be meeting after this to talk about how to move forward with a website planner and incorporate the ideas that are priorities for the membership. And we'll go from there on that. And I want to thank the committee again for all the work that it's done. So thank you so much. I'm going to unshare if I can. Did I? Oops. I don't want to. I'll stop my share there. There we go. And Cindy, thanks for your technical help and for the polls. And I believe it is my job to turn it over to the inimitable Jill Erickson to take us home. Is that right, Jill?
That is correct. I'll pause there. You did so great on timing to see if folks have any questions. We have a few minutes before we're at the hour, and if folks have questions, they could put them in the chat or share those. Let us know that you want to join the communications committee and help them work on getting our website up and going.
Jill,
There is one. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, there's one question. Will there be a cost associated with the coalition hosting a website, or is it too early to know?
I think a little early. I think the cost that we asked MLTC for at the outset was primarily for the planning and design of the website to get up. So we'll do an expense analysis of hosting, which of course can be facilitated in a relatively inexpensive way on a bunch of sites, and then we'll have a plan for. And this is kind of part of what Cindy's, I think, asking implicitly is, who's going to manage it and how we're going to accomplish that. So we will do that as part of our work going forward, whether it's a volunteer model or we take turns or we, let it sit resident with one organization on behalf of others. Still early, but we will get there. So absolutely. Thanks for the question.
I just wanted to point out, I did post those links that Larry had provided there in the chat. And also Clint Miller shared a resource from Gathering Waters Land Trust in Wisconsin that you all may want to check out.
Yeah, there were a lot of them, and I just picked 3 representative ones. So I encourage everybody to go to that LTA page to look at all of them. So.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I do want to wrap us up. I want to say thank you to the committee for all of your leadership and support. It's really been an honor to co-chair this committee the last 2 years. I want to thank you to all of the coalition members. I've really gotten to know some of you over the last couple of years in this work that we're doing together. So thank you. And thank you for the hard work that you're doing day in and day out. It's not easy, and the reason that we come together and make this space is so that we can share resources and lean on each other and hold each other accountable to do our work in the best possible way that we can. So what's next? The committees, the Advocacy Committee, the Education Committee, the Communication Committee are going to keep working. And if you're interested in joining in that work, please let us know. What else is going to happen? We're going to send you an email with all of these resources and materials. So the slides and the links and who was attending today. Our goal is to hold 3 more peer learning sessions over the next couple of months. We suggested looking at the 10th of the month, but we'll put that in a poll to you all and let you all decide what works best. And we'll finalize that survey that we took on the topics. So we'll look at those and share that. And before we move forward as a coalition, we'll make sure that we do have some consensus on that. It's also really important that we think about who's going to lead the planning for next year's committee. Mike Powell served as the co-chair this year, so now he's got lots of experience and is agreed to co-chair, but we would really like somebody from the coalition to step up and nominate themselves, or perhaps you want to nominate somebody in your circle to serve as our co-chair. we need to bring in some new leadership and give others the opportunity to have all this fun. I can't hog it all to myself. So I think with that, I would just say to all of you, be safe, be healthy, and stay strong, do your best. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks to all.